The desert stretched for miles, an endless sweep of red dust, sagebrush, and dying light. Heat shimmered above the rocks, and the only sound was the dry rasp of wind brushing over the sand. Somewhere in that vast silence, a girl stumbled forward, her lips cracked and her skin burned raw by the sun. Clara Hayes had been walking for 2 days since the attack on her family's wagon. The memory burned behind her eyelids, the gunfire, her mother's scream, the smoke rising from the canvas top as their belongings caught fire. She'd hidden under the wagon when the raiders came, biting her own hand to keep from crying out. When the world went quiet again, she'd crawled out to find only ash, empty harnesses, and the bodies of the mules lying still. She had nothing left but a torn dress and a small canteen already dry. Her boots had holes in the soles. By the time she saw the faint outline of a mesa in the distance, she was barely aware of herself. Her breath came in harsh, ragged gasps. The desert was a merciless thing, beautiful, yes, but deadly to those who didn't belong to it. When she fell the first time, she thought it was the end. The sand was cool where her cheek touched it, and she almost welcomed the dark edges closing around her vision. But a shadow fell over her, a tall figure, silent and still. She tried to open her eyes. The sun burned too bright. All she saw was the glint of a metal ornament and the dark outline of a man, his hair long and bound with leather, his chest marked with streaks of red paint. "Don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man didn't move. He crouched beside her, studying her face. His eyes were dark, the kind that saw everything, the kind that missed nothing. He said something she didn't understand, in a language that rolled like low thunder. When she didn't respond, he reached for his water flask and lifted her head gently. The coolness of the water shocked her lips, then her throat. She coughed and gasped, but drank greedily. When she looked up again, he was still watching her, expressionless, but not cruel. He was Apache. She knew it from the patterns on his buckskin shirt, from the way he moved, quiet, deliberate, part of the land itself. She'd heard stories of his kind all her life, told by frightened settlers around campfires. Savage, merciless, godless. But the man before her didn't look like a savage. He looked like someone who had seen too much death and had learned not to fear it. When she tried to stand, her knees gave out. Without a word, he caught her, lifted her easily into his arms, and began to walk. The world swayed as she drifted in and out of consciousness. She felt the rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, steady as hoofbeats on hard ground. They reached a canyon as the sun bled red into the horizon. Hidden between the cliffs was a small spring, its water glinting like glass. He laid her down near it and brought her more water, then strips of dried meat. She ate slowly, tears blurring her eyes. When she finally found the strength to speak, her voice was a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" The warrior didn't answer at first. He sat across from her, sharpening a flint knife with calm precision. The firelight danced on his face-bronzed skin, high cheekbones, and a scar that ran down his jaw like lightning dot. Finally, he looked up. "Because you are not meant to die here." His English was rough, but clear. He rose, took something from around his neck, a small carving of a hawk, and set it beside her on the sand. "Keep this," he said, "for strength." When the first light of dawn touched the canyon walls, she awoke alone. The fire was gone, his tracks leading away into the desert. The hawk carving lay warm in her hand. As if it still held his touch, she pressed it to her heart, not knowing that this brief encounter would shape her destiny and that one day she would see those same dark eyes again. 5 long years had passed since that day in the desert when Clara Hayes had been carried to life by an Apache warrior she never saw again. Time had changed many things, the land, the people around her, and even the way she saw herself, but it had not dulled the memory of those dark, eyes in the firelight or the hawk carving that still rested against her skin every night. She kept the talisman hidden, tied to a leather cord beneath her dress, close to her heart. Her aunt, who had taken her in after the massacre, never knew about it. To the rest of the world, Clara was just another settler girl, quiet, modest, and hardworking. But the girl who once wandered half dead in the desert had been replaced by a woman who had seen too much of what the world could do to the weak. Their small ranch lay a few miles from Fort Bowie, a harsh stretch of land that only the determined could survive on. The soil was stubborn, the summers cruel, and the nights full of howls that echoed from the mountains. Still, Clara worked from dawn till dusk, feeding chickens, mending fences, nursing calves, all under the endless western sky that seemed both her enemy and her home. Every so often, she'd look toward the far horizon and wonder if Hitaza, though she didn't yet know his name, was out there somewhere. Sometimes at dusk, when the light turned gold and the wind whispered through the dry grass, she almost felt his presence near her. It was foolish, she told herself, to think of a man who had probably forgotten her. Yet some part of her still believed that moment in the canyon had meant something more than mercy. The talk in town was full of tension. The Apache had been pushed deeper into their lands, and raids were becoming more frequent. Cattle stolen, ranches burned. Men gathered rifles and swore vengeance. Women whispered in fear as soldiers rode through, their faces set and grim. Clara never joined in the hatred. She had seen the desert through Apache eyes once, the silence, the strength, the pride. She couldn't bring herself to curse them, though she hid her sympathy carefully. It wasn't safe to be kind to the wrong people in those days. Her uncle, a hard man with whiskey breath and a temper that turned mean after dark, warned her not to wander near the hills. "Those savages'll skin you alive, girl," he'd say, slamming his fist on the table for emphasis. Clara would nod, pretending to agree, but her thoughts always drifted back to the man who had carried her out of death's reach. One evening, as the sun sank low and turned the sky a bleeding crimson, Clara sat on the porch mending a torn saddle strap. The cicadas hummed, the cattle bawled in the distance, and the smell of dust hung heavy in the air. The quiet should have comforted her, but lately it didn't. Something was changing in the land. She could feel it. The air was sharper, the nights colder. She'd noticed tracks near the creek the week before, hoof prints that didn't belong to their herd, and marks that could only have been made by moccasins. When she told her uncle, he spat into the dirt and muttered, "Apaches? They're moving again." That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the cabin walls. Her hand went to the small carving at her throat. The hawk's wings were worn smooth from years of her touch. She thought of the man who'd given it to her, the quiet power in his voice when he'd said, "You are not meant to die here." She wondered if he still lived, if he'd fought or fled or been taken by the soldiers like so many others. Some nights she dreamed of him. In her dream, she was back in that canyon, and he was there standing by the spring, looking at her with eyes that held both sorrow and fire. When she reached out to him, he always vanished into the rising dawn. Clara didn't yet know that fate was already drawing their paths together again, and that the man she couldn't forget was closer than she dared imagine. The evening had fallen quiet over the Hayes Ranch, the kind of quiet that presses heavy on the land before something changes forever. Clara was closing the chicken coop when she heard it, the faint sound of hooves stumbling in the dirt. Not the sure-footed step of a ranch horse, but something dragging, uneven, tired. She froze, clutching her lantern. The sun had dipped low, staining the desert in red and violet shadows. Out beyond the corral, a shape moved through the dust, slow, swaying, like a ghost come out of the mountains. Her first thought was that it might be one of the drifters or wounded soldiers who sometimes lost their way between Fort Bowie and the Mexican border. But as the figure came closer, she saw the long black hair, the painted beads, The fringed leather leggings darkened with blood. An Apache. Her heart leapt to her throat. Every warning her uncle had ever shouted flashed through her mind. If you see one, you run. Don't stop to think. But she didn't move. The man half fell from his horse, his knees striking the dirt. He tried to rise, then collapsed again. For a long moment, the only sound was the horse's labored breathing and the dry hiss of wind over the grass. Then, before she even realized she'd made the choice, Clara set the lantern down and ran. When she reached him, the smell of iron and dust filled her lungs. He was bleeding from a gunshot wound along his ribs, the blood soaking through his shirt and dripping into the earth. His eyes fluttered open, dark and distant, and when they fixed on her face, something flickered in them: confusion, recognition, disbelief. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Don't move," she whispered, tearing her apron to press against the wound. "You're losing too much blood." He didn't answer. His breathing came in harsh gasps. Then, as her hand brushed his chest, she felt something beneath the fabric, a carved piece of wood. She pulled it free and stared. A hawk. Her breath caught. Time seemed to fold in on itself. The canyon. The spring. The same hands that had lifted her from the burning sand years ago. It couldn't be, but it was. The man she had dreamed of for 5 years lay dying in her yard. Apache. She whispered, her voice trembling. "You saved me once." His gaze found hers again, cloudy but aware now. He tried to speak, his voice a rasp of pain and memory. "You? The girl." He stopped, grimaced, and closed his eyes. She didn't wait for more. She dragged his arm over her shoulder and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the barn, stumbling through the dust and darkness. The horse followed, limping behind. Inside, she laid him on a pile of hay, panting from the effort. The scent of earth and straw filled the air, mixing with the copper tang of blood. She lit another lantern, the glow flickering across his face. Older now, scarred, his hair streaked faintly with gray. But it was him, Taza. The same stillness, the same strength hidden beneath the pain. She fetched water from the trough, cleaned the wound, and tore more cloth for bandages. He didn't speak much, just watched her with those dark eyes that still seemed to see right through her. When she was done, she sat back, trembling. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "The soldiers will kill you if they find you." He exhaled slowly, his voice low but steady. "They already tried." Clara blinked, unsure if he meant the wound or something deeper. He turned his head slightly toward her, studying her face. "You live," he said, almost to himself. "You live." She nodded, tears burning her eyes. "Because of you." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustle of hay and the crackle of the lantern. The years melted away, and they were once again the two souls who had met between life and death. Finally. His eyelids grew heavy, and he whispered something in Apache, a phrase she didn't understand. But the sound of it lingered like a promise. Clara sat beside him through the night, keeping the lantern low. Every creak of the barn made her jump. Every whisper of wind sounded like approaching riders. But she didn't move. Not this time. 5 years ago, he had carried her to safety. Tonight, she would return the debt and perhaps begin something neither of them could escape. The barn smelled of hay, horses, and faint cedar smoke, a safe sanctuary from the dangers lurking beyond the ranch. Clara had worked quickly, her hands trembling as she tore strips of cloth to bandage Taza's wounds. The moonlight spilled through the cracks in the walls, painting him in silver and shadow, highlighting the sharp lines of his face, older now, scarred, and impossibly strong. He lay quiet on the pile of hay, breathing unevenly. One hand resting near the carved hawk she recognized instantly. His dark eyes, now clearer in the lantern's glow, opened slowly and met hers. There was recognition, a flicker of something deeper, a memory of that desert canyon so many years ago. "You? Alive," he said in broken English, each word deliberate, heavy with effort. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm alive because of you. And now I'm here to keep you alive." For a moment, he didn't move. Then his gaze softened, just slightly, and he reached with a trembling hand. Clara caught it, gripping his wrist to steady him as she adjusted the bandage around his side. The warmth of his hand, even through the cloth, sent a jolt through her, a reminder of the life and death moment they had shared when he had carried her across the desert. "You are." "Grown," he said, his voice low, almost a growl, but with awe buried beneath it. "Not a girl." She looked away, suddenly shy, though the years of surviving the desert had hardened her in other ways. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "And you? You are still here." The wind rattled the barn walls. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that echoed the isolation of the moment. Clara lowered her lantern slightly, careful that no one would see the glow from the outside. Soldiers patrolled in the distance. Apache scouts moved silently in the mountains. Every step of their lives had become a careful dance between survival and danger. "I can't stay long," he said finally, wincing as he shifted. "My people need me." Clara felt a pang in her chest. She had known this might come, but hearing it spoken aloud made the ache real. "I know," she said softly. "But for now, rest. You are safe here. No one will find you." Taza's eyes drifted toward the small hawk carving lying between them. His fingers brushed it instinctively, lingering. He had given it to her as a talisman, a protection, a connection, and now it was still here alive in her hands. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging its presence. The years had made them strangers in many ways, but that small piece of wood tethered them to a past neither could forget. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the sound of Taza's labored breathing and Clara's quiet movements fetching water, dampening claws, tending the bandages. Their words were few, the language barrier persistent, but each glance, each touch spoke volumes. She realized she had waited for this reunion for years, imagined it countless times in the quiet moments of her life. The man who had saved her, the one she had thought lost forever, was here, wounded and fragile, yet alive. And she would guard him with everything she had. Outside, the desert darkened further. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Clara wrapped a woolen blanket around his shoulders, settling him comfortably on the hay. He tried to rise, but she placed a firm hand against his chest. "No," she said, voice steady but soft. "Not yet. You need rest." He looked at her for a long time, eyes narrowing slightly as though studying her soul. In that gaze, Clara saw both gratitude and something more, a spark of emotion that had survived years of separation, fear, and the harshness of the world. Finally, he leaned back, closing his eyes. "You trust me?" he asked, almost inaudibly. "I trust you," she replied without hesitation. "Because you once saved me. Now I save you." The words hung between them, more powerful than any promise. And in that barn, in the dim light and the shadowed corners, two lives converged, once more strangers, yet bound by the desert, by survival, and by a connection that refused to fade. The night stretched on, silent but for the rhythm of Taza's breathing. Clara remained close, guarding him not just from the dangers outside, but from the memories that could have driven him into the arms of the past. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, fragile hope that their story was far from over. The wind shifted that afternoon, carrying with it the scent of horses, dust, and the metallic tang of fear. Clara had been fetching water from the creek when she saw them 3 riders. their silhouettes sharp against the horizon, moving steadily toward the ranch, soldiers or bounty hunters. Either way, they were dangerous, armed and relentless. Her heart tightened. She had thought the danger had passed after the initial Apache raids years ago. She had thought, perhaps foolishly, that life would allow her a small pocket of peace. But the sight of armed men riding toward her ranch shattered that illusion. Inside the barn, Taza stirred, shifting weakly on the hay. His dark eyes opened, calculating, sharp even in his weakened state. He saw the approaching riders reflected in the lantern light, the tension in Clara's posture, the fear clinging to her like a second skin. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If they find you, they'll kill you." Taza's jaw tightened. Though his body ached, the warrior in him refused to lie down. He struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Hide," he said in his rough English, almost a growl. "And stay quiet." Clara's hands flew over the barn doors, bolting them shut, stacking barrels and crates to obscure the interior. She had been taught to survive, but never like this, not with someone she cared for. Someone who had once saved her and was now helpless in her arms. The riders arrived soon after, their horses snorting, hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. They stopped near the corral, scanning the area with rifles poised. "We heard there's a renegade Apache hiding near this ranch," one called, voice sharp and commanding. "Step out now, and we won't shoot." Clara swallowed, her mind racing. Step outside, and Taza could die. Refuse, and they would search the barn. She forced herself to steady her shaking hands. "There's no one here," she called out, keeping her voice calm, controlled, betraying nothing of the truth inside. The men exchanged glances. "We'll see about that," another said, dismounting. Boots crunching on the dry earth as he approached the barn. Inside, Taza groaned softly. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Do as I say." Clara led the soldiers on a careful path. She showed them empty pens, ransacked corners, pretending the barn was abandoned, convincing them there was no Apache here. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought they might hear it, thought it might betray the secret she was guarding. Minutes felt like hours. The leader's gaze swept over the barn, lingering on shadows, examining every gap in the boards. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts. She prayed silently, calling on every scrap of luck and memory from the desert, remembering how Taza had once carried her to safety, and hoping now she could return the favor. Finally, the leader barked orders to his men. "Nothing here. Let's move on." The hooves faded in the distance, leaving the ranch in an eerie silence that rang louder than any gunshot. Clara leaned against the wall, hands pressed to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. Taza remained still, his eyes closed, muscles taut even in exhaustion. "You lied," he said quietly, his voice low but edged with steel. "You risked yourself." "I had to," she replied, her voice firm. "You saved me once. Now I save you." He opened his eyes, and for the first time in days or years, there was a faint smile, a spark of pride and gratitude in those dark, haunted eyes. Though the danger had passed for now, Clara knew it would not be long before the world forced them to make impossible choices again. But tonight, they were alive, together, and in the quiet aftermath, the bond between them deepened, a fragile trust forged in blood, fear, and the memory of the desert canyon where their lives had first collided. The night stretched ahead, the moon rising over the arid land. Somewhere in the shadows the desert watched and waited as it always did. But Clara and Taza, wounded and weary, had survived the first test of their reunion. And the memory of this night, the night she risked everything for the man who once saved her, would linger, haunting them, shaping the path they were destined to walk together. The next morning, the desert burned under a merciless sun. Clara moved quietly around the ranch, tending the small flock of sheep and checking the fences, all the while keeping one eye on Taza. He had regained some strength overnight, but the wound on his side throbbed with every movement. He rested in the barn, gazing toward the distant mountains where the wind carried the scent of smoke and danger. Clara noticed the tension in his posture. He didn't speak much, but she knew from the set of his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes, that something was coming. She had felt it too, the shifting winds, the distant sounds of drums and hooves echoing faintly in the canyon beyond. By midday, the truth became undeniable. Smoke curled into the sky from the cliffs and valleys to the west. Flames licked the dry brush, devouring the earth with an almost deliberate hunger. The Apache lands were under attack, settlers pushing in with rifles and torches, claiming territory, burning what they deemed useless. Taza's dark eyes blazed, a mixture of rage and sorrow. He tried to rise, testing his strength. "My people. In danger," he murmured in broken English. "I must go." Clara's heart clenched. She had known this might happen. The man she had saved, the man who had returned to her life wounded and fragile, now faced a choice between survival with her and loyalty to his tribe. "You can't go," she said softly. "Not like this. You'll die." Taza shook his head. "I cannot. Leave them." His voice was firm, resolute, a warrior's voice that brooked no argument. "They need me." Clara bit her lip, torn between fear and understanding. "Then take something from me," she said, pressing the small hawk carving into his palm. "A reminder that someone waits for you, that you are not alone." He studied it, turning it over in his hands. His fingers closed around it tightly. "You saved me once," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Now you give me strength." Hours passed as they prepared. Clara tended to his wounds one last time, tightened the bandages, and helped him mount his horse. The desert sun beat down, sweat running into her eyes, dirt smearing her face. Every step toward the canyon was heavy with unspoken words, fear, longing, regret, and a bond forged in life and death. When they reached the edge of the canyon, the full scale of the destruction became clear. Smoke and flame clawed the sky, the air thick with the acrid tang of burning timber and grass. Apache warriors were scattered, fighting desperately against better armed settlers. Taza's gaze swept the chaos, calculating, sharp, a wolf among fire. "Stay," he said to Clara, his voice low but commanding. "Safe. Here. Do not follow." "No," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I won't leave you." He looked at her, expression unyielding yet gentle, and shook his head. "You cannot. Promise me watch. Wait. I will come back." With that, he spurred his horse into the smoke and chaos, his figure disappearing among the flames and the screams. Clara stood frozen, the hawk carving pressed to her chest, the wind carrying the scent of fire and ash to her nose. She watched until his figure vanished entirely, leaving only smoke curling toward the sky and the distant sound of battle fading into the canyon walls. Her heart ached with the weight of his absence and the promise he left behind. She knew she would wait, even if the wait stretched for years, because she had seen the courage and honor in him, and because she could not forget the man who had once carried her from death and now carried the fate of his people on his shoulders. Night fell over the burned canyon, and Clara returned to the ranch, haunted by the fire, the cries of the wounded, and the knowledge that Taza was out there somewhere, fighting for his people, while she remained behind, guarding the memory of a love that had begun in the desert and refused to die. Weeks passed since Taza had ridden into the burning canyon, leaving Clara behind at the ranch. Each day, she watched the horizon, praying that he had survived the battle, that he would return. The desert, once silent and lonely, now seemed alive with threat. Every rustle in the sagebrush, every hoofbeat in the distance, made her heart pound with both hope and fear. One evening, as the sun sank behind the distant mesas, Clara saw movement on the ridge. Her heart leapt, but then she noticed the shapes accompanying the lone rider. A band of raiders, larger than any group she had seen before, rode toward the ranch. Panic surged through her. She ran inside, gathering what weapons she could: a rifle, a few knives, and buckets of water, but the weight of her fear made her hands shake. By the time the raiders reached the ranch, Clara realized she was vastly outnumbered. They stormed across the yard, cutting fences, slashing at the livestock, and shouting in cruel voices. The scent of smoke and blood filled the air, mingling with the dry desert dust. Clara's breath came in short, harsh gasps as she tried to fend off the attackers. But it was hopeless. They were too many, too strong, and she was too alone. Just as despair threatened to consume her, a shadow moved along the edge of the property, a familiar, impossibly steady shadow. Taza. His horse appeared out of nowhere, strong and dark against the dying light, and he charged into the raiders with the precision of a man born to battle. He was older now, hardened by the years, but still the same warrior who had carried her through the desert and taught her that life could be seized even in the face of death. With swift, deliberate movements, he disarmed attackers, knocked men from their horses, and struck fear into those who thought they could overwhelm him. Clara watched, heart pounding, as he reached her side. His eyes met hers briefly, the dark intensity of his gaze locking with hers in a silent promise. "I am here. I will not let them take you." Taza's presence changed the course of the skirmish. The raiders, startled by his skill and ferocity, faltered and then fled, retreating back toward the canyon under the shadow of the mesas. Taza stood in the dust, breathing heavily, his horse snorting and stamping. The ranch was in disarray, fences broken, animals scattered, but Clara was alive, and for that, she felt a surge of relief so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, rushing to his side, brushing dust from his shoulders. He shook his head, eyes softening slightly as he looked at her. "I could not leave you. Not again." For a long moment, they stood there in the fading light, the desert wind stirring around them, carrying the scent of smoke, dust, and faint wildflowers from the distant canyon. The battle had passed, but the tension remained. This was their world, harsh and unforgiving, and danger could return at any moment. Clara felt a surge of emotion she could no longer suppress. She reached for his hand, gripping it firmly, and he did not pull away. "I thought I lost you," she said, voice trembling. "You didn't," he replied, his tone steady but filled with unspoken depths. "And you? You survived. Stronger than I could have imagined." In that moment, the war around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the desert, bound by years of memory, survival, and the unspoken promise of something more. They had faced death, fire, and enemies together, but now, for the first time, there was a chance for life, for connection, for a love that had been forged in the harshest of conditions. Clara knew this was only the beginning. The desert was vast, dangerous, and full of unknowns, but Taza had returned. And for the first time in years, she felt the stirring of hope. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky, casting long shadows over the desert floor. Clara and Taza moved cautiously along a narrow canyon trail, the remnants of the raiders' chaos behind them. His wound had mostly healed, but the memory of the attack remained in the stiffness of his movements. The desert had tested them both, but now the mountains offered a fragile refuge, a place where they could breathe. If only for a while, they reached a small cave tucked behind a cluster of boulders. The entrance was hidden, shielded from prying eyes, and inside, the air was cool and safe. Clara set down her pack, feeling a rare sense of relief. The world outside had been unforgiving, but here, among the rocks and the shadows, she felt a fragile peace. Taza leaned against the wall, his eyes scanning the horizon through the cave entrance. "Quiet," he said in his low, deliberate voice. "Safe. For now." Clara knelt beside the small fire she built, careful to keep the smoke low. She noticed how different he looked in this light, less a warrior fighting constantly, more a man carrying the weight of his people and his past. His dark eyes, always alert, softened as they met hers. "Tell me," she said cautiously, "what is it like? Your world?" He shifted, uncertain, then spoke slowly. "Hard, beautiful. Spirit strong. Family, tribe, life all one." His English was broken, but each word carried weight. "You don't understand." "I want to," Clara whispered. "I want to see it. I want to understand you." He studied her for a long moment, the shadows of the cave playing across his face. "You different," he said finally. "You not afraid of me." She smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I've been afraid before." "Not of you." The days in the cave passed slowly. They shared water and dried meat, exchanged stories, her in English, him in Apache, slowly bridging the gap between their worlds. Clara learned the meaning of the hand signs, the careful movements, and the respect that guided every action in his culture. Taza learned to understand her words more clearly, and with each lesson, the bond between them deepened. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, Clara found herself sitting closer to him than before. He did not move away. She traced a finger along the hawk carving around her neck, a gift from him years ago, and felt a warmth radiate through her chest. "You belong to two worlds," he said softly, almost to himself, watching her. "Not easy. Hard choice." Clara's heart clenched. She had felt it for years, the pull between survival in the settler world and the life she could never fully claim in his. Yet here, with him, she felt something neither world could touch, a connection born in fire, danger, and shared silence. "Maybe we can belong to each other," she said quietly. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable for a heartbeat, then softened. "Perhaps, if survive." Night fell, and the fire cast flickering shadows on the cave walls. They spoke less now, letting the silence carry them, letting the nearness of each other speak louder than words. A brush of hands, a shared look, a breath held too long, each small gesture was weighty, significant, a promise that had not yet been named. Outside, the mountains were alive with the distant sounds of the world, the rustle of animals, the whisper of wind, the faint echo of soldiers or raiders in the valleys below. But inside the cave, the world narrowed to two people, bound by survival, memory, and a growing, undeniable love. Clara pressed herself closer to the warmth of the fire, stealing a glance at Taza. He returned it, a faint, guarded smile tugging at his lips. Between the desert and the mountains, between fear and hope, between life and death, they had carved a space that belonged only to them. And in that fragile sanctuary, they both understood. Some bonds could not be broken by distance, danger, or time. They belonged together, even if the world outside refused to acknowledge it. The desert air was sharp with the coming winter, and the mountains had begun to hold their first frost. Clara and Taza had spent weeks hiding in the cave, surviving on dried meat, water, and the small comfort of each other's presence. The world beyond their refuge, however, pressed ever closer. Soldiers and settlers scoured the land, chasing rumors of Apache movement. Taza knew the risk. Every day in the cave could be the day they found him. and he could not let Clara be caught in the crossfire. One early morning, just as the first light gilded the canyon walls, Taza rose and began packing their meager belongings. His movements were deliberate, calm, but there was a weight in his eyes that Clara had never seen before. "Where?" "Going?" she asked softly, sensing the inevitability. "To protect you," he replied in broken English. "I must go. Cannot let them find you." Clara's heart ached. She had known this might come, yet hearing it spoken aloud made the fear in her chest tangible. "But I can come with you. We can stay together." He shook his head, grim, eyes dark with resolve. "No, too dangerous. You wait, safe. I return." Her hands trembled as she pressed the hawk carving into his palm, the talisman that had first connected them 5 years ago. "Take this," she whispered. "A reminder. A promise." Taza studied the carving, fingers closing over it tightly. He looked at her then, really looked, and in his gaze Clara saw the depth of all the unspoken words, the love, the longing, the shared danger. "You keep me alive," he said quietly. "I survive because you believe." The moment stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years, survival, and unacknowledged desire. He bent slightly and brushed a hand against her cheek, a gesture gentle and deliberate, a promise of return. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of it linger, even as his shadow began to fade into the canyon light. "I will." "Wait," she whispered. "You?" "Wait," he echoed, his voice breaking slightly. Then, without another word, he turned and mounted his horse. The sound of hooves striking stone echoed in the canyon, carrying him away from her, away from the life they had built together, back into a world that demanded survival above all else. Clara stood at the cave's entrance long after his figure vanished, her fingers tight around the carving, the desert wind tugging at her hair and dress. The silence that followed was suffocating, filled with all the things left unsaid. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her own heart, clinging to the memory of his gaze, his words, the faint brush of his fingers. Days turned into weeks. Clara tended the cave as best she could, rationing supplies, listening to the distant cries of the land hooves, shouts, the low rumble of soldiers in pursuit. Every evening she climbed to the cave's mouth to scan the horizon, hoping, praying that Taza would emerge from the desert smoke and dust, alive and unchanged. At night she dreamed of him. She saw the canyon fire, the spring, the barn where she had first hidden him. In every dream he returned to her, strong, alive, and waiting. But dawn always stole him from her sight, leaving only the bitter ache of absence. And yet she waited, because the bond they had forged in life and death, in danger and in fleeting moments of trust and tenderness, refused to break. Because she had seen in his eyes, in the hawk carving, in the memory of the desert, that their connection was eternal, unyielding. Even in the face of separation. Clara pressed the carving to her lips, whispered a silent promise to the wind. "I will wait until you return." And somewhere out in the vast expanse of desert and mountains, Taza rode through the canyon thinking of her, carrying her image in his heart, knowing that no matter the distance, no matter the danger, some bonds could not be severed, not by time, not by war, not by the cruelty of the world. The desert had changed since the day Taza rode away. Seasons had passed, the mesas shifting in the harsh sun, the rivers running low, and the winter winds biting harder than ever. Clara Hayes had stayed at the ranch, tending the land, protecting it from intruders, and keeping the memory of Taza alive in her heart. Every morning she checked the horizon. Every evening she climbed to the highest ridge, scanning the dust-hazed distances, hoping against hope for the sound of hooves or the shadow of a familiar figure. she had grown into a woman, tempered by the harshness of the land, wise and careful, yet her heart had never hardened completely. It was impossible when one's soul had been touched so profoundly. The hawk carving, worn smooth from years of handling, hung beneath her dress, a constant reminder of the man who had saved her, taught her, and claimed a piece of her heart without even trying. It was late afternoon when she saw movement far across the plain. At first she thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat. But then the shape grew clearer, a lone rider, moving steadily toward the ranch, dark against the golden horizon. Her heart caught in her throat. The gait, the bearing, the deliberate, unhurried grace, it could only be him. Taza, she whispered, disbelief mingling with hope. Her legs carried her toward the ridge as if the desert itself urged her on. The rider drew closer. As the dust rose around him, she saw the familiar dark eyes, the scarred face, older and more weathered, but unmistakably him. He slowed as he neared the ranch, dismounting with care, but the aura of quiet strength remained. The hawk carving, now a symbol of years of waiting and surviving, had guided him back to her. Clara ran the last few steps, tears streaming down her dust-streaked cheeks. You came back," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Promised," he said softly, voice low, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His eyes softened as he took her in, the woman she had become, strong, resilient, yet still carrying the tenderness of the girl he had once saved. Before she could speak, he reached for her hand, enveloping it in his larger, calloused one. "You waited," he said, almost reverently. "Kept belief." "I did," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. Every day, every moment. The desert around them seemed to pause, the wind stilled, the dust settled, as if the world itself recognized the reunion. The hawk carving in her hand was warm, a connection between the past and present, a testament to a bond neither time nor distance could break. Taza's other hand lifted to cradle her face. The warrior, the protector, the man who had carried her through death and desert alike, leaned closer. "You kept me alive," he murmured. "And now I keep you." In that moment, the world beyond the ranch, the danger, the wars, the prejudices fell away. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, became their witness. Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of years of longing, survival, and unspoken love. It was fierce, tender, and raw, a culmination of everything that had passed between them, the deserts, the fires, the battles, and the nights of fear and hope. When they finally parted, they clung to each other, breathless, hearts beating in unison. The hawk carving lay between them, a silent symbol of the journey that had led them to this moment. "You stay?" Clara asked softly, still holding his hand. "Always," Taza replied. "Never leave again." And under the crimson glow of the setting sun, with the desert stretching endlessly around them, the girl he had saved became the woman he could never forget, and the man who had once vanished into the canyon returned, whole and unwavering, to claim the life, the heart, and the love that had waited for him through every danger the Wild West could throw. They stood together, shadows long against the sand, bound by a promise, a past, and a love that had survived fire, war, and years of separation. And for the first time, the desert felt like home, not just a place of survival, but a place where love had triumphed.